I'm Alessandra Mancuso, 32, and I built my life from the ground up. No shortcuts, no safety nets. For years, I supported my husband through school, startup failures, and late-night panic attacks. I co-signed the loans, paid the bills, handled everything so he could focus. But when he left me by text for a 21-year-old and wiped out our joint account, I made a different choice, and he never saw it coming. Ever been blindsided by someone you carried for years? Tell me your story in the comments. You're not the only one. Before I get into what happened, drop where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to reclaim your peace after being betrayed, hit like and subscribe for more stories about boundaries, resilience, and walking away with power. Because what came next wasn't revenge. It was better. I met Vincent when I was 24, working 2 jobs and finishing my bachelor's in communications part-time. He was bartending a few nights a week and taking evening classes in software development. We met at the bar where he worked, nothing glamorous. He was funny, attentive, and had that boyish optimism that made you believe in potential. I wouldn't call it love at first sight, but it was easy. Natural. And at the time, that felt like enough. We moved in together 6 months later, into a tiny one-bedroom that smelled like someone else's cooking no matter how much you cleaned. Rent was steep for what it was, but Vincent couldn't cover half. He was still in school, and his hours at the bar had just been cut. So I paid 70%, and when he couldn't make that work either, I floated the rest. I told myself it was temporary. A phase. The investment before the payoff. The first time I edited his resume, it was because he had forgotten to spell check and listed his bartending job as managing high-volume liquid operations. I remember laughing, telling him, "You're not pitching a hedge fund," and spending 3 hours making it look professional. He didn't say thank you. Not really. He just looked at the final version and said, "Yeah, that'll get me something better." I ignored the lack of acknowledgement. He was stressed. He was trying. I repeated that to myself a lot during those years. He landed a paid internship with a local startup a few months later. It wasn't much, but it was a foot in the door. I celebrated with takeout from the sushi place he liked, not in our budget, but I figured the occasion called for it. He barely touched it, too busy sketching out ideas for what he said would be his own startup someday. I remember clearing his plate and telling myself, it's good he's focused. By the time I was 26, I had taken a second job, part-time social media consulting for a dentist's office, just to make sure the bills were covered while Vincent worked on launching his project. He named it quirkily, a boutique app development firm for small creative businesses. The name didn't make sense to me, but he loved it. He said it sounded modern, fun, disruptive. I spent weekends helping him draft business proposals and build out the website, even though I had no technical background. When we couldn't afford a designer, I taught myself just enough Wix to make something decent. Looking back, I realized I was doing most of the actual work. Vincent was the idea guy, the one with vision. I was the one answering emails, setting up invoices, writing pitch decks, fixing formatting on contracts, keeping our shared calendar up to date. I wasn't listed anywhere on the site, of course. I was just helping out. That's how he phrased it. When his first few clients came in, he didn't bring in enough to take a paycheck. So I kept covering rent, groceries, car insurance, his phone bill. Once this scales, he kept saying, "We'll be set. You won't have to work both jobs anymore." I clung to that line like a promise. Like it was gospel. I remember getting an overdraft notice the same week he bought a new monitor for his home office. When I asked him about it, he said, "It's a business expense. You want this to grow, right?" That was how he framed it, as if I were the one in danger of holding us back. I didn't push. I just transferred some of my savings and went back to work early the next day. People like to talk about how women lose themselves in relationships. But I didn't lose myself. I just handed over more and more until I didn't recognize what was left. Birthday dinners were skipped because he had a client emergency. Weekends became workdays. I stopped going out with friends because we were saving money, even though I was the only one bringing it in. When my grandmother passed away and I told him I'd need to take time off to attend the funeral, he asked if I could work remotely while I was there because he needed help with a client proposal. That was the first time I felt something crack. Not break. Just crack. The worst part? I defended him. To my sister. To my coworkers. To myself. I told everyone he was building something, that I believed in him, that he was just under pressure. And when people raised eyebrows or said something like, "You're doing a lot," I'd brush it off. "He's just trying to get through the first few years," I'd say. "It'll be different once he's established." And it did get different. Just not the way I expected. Eventually, the business picked up. He hired a freelance designer and a part-time developer. By then, I'd helped secure 3 of his biggest clients, one through my old college roommate who ran a boutique clothing line, one through a nonprofit I volunteered for, and one from a former client of the dentist who needed an app for appointment scheduling. Vincent closed the deals, but I laid the groundwork. I never asked for a cut. I didn't even think to. I believed we were building something together. He started paying himself. Not much at first, but enough that I could drop one of my jobs. I remember thinking, this is it. This is when it turns around. I pictured us moving into a slightly bigger place. Maybe finally going on a real vacation. I was still handling the bills, of course. Still managing our household budget. Still fielding emails when his assistant didn't respond fast enough. At night, he'd fall asleep on the couch with his laptop open, half-finished code on the screen and a beer bottle on the table. I'd cover him with a blanket and turn off the light. That was our rhythm. I worked. He worked. We didn't talk much about the future anymore. We were just surviving the present. When I look back now, it's not just the money I resent. It's the way I made myself small for the sake of his dream. The dinners I cooked when I got home exhausted. The birthdays I didn't celebrate. The times I pretended not to notice his condescension in front of clients. The way I believed that being supportive meant being invisible. We didn't share a business. We didn't share a vision. We shared a lease, a grocery bill, and a silent agreement that I would do the unglamorous work while he pursued success. And I did. For 6 years. I gave him everything I could, my time, my skills, my connections, my credit. I convinced myself that if I just waited a little longer, it would pay off. I was wrong. And he had no idea what was coming. It didn't fall apart all at once. It chipped. First, it was small things. Things I told myself not to take personally. Vincent started coming home later. Sometimes past 10. I'd ask if he'd eaten and he'd just grunt, heading straight for the shower. We used to eat dinner together, even if it was late and microwaved. But that slowly disappeared, replaced with him claiming he already grabbed something with a client or wasn't hungry. I didn't push. I figured he was tired. I knew what startup stress looked like. Or at least, I thought I did. He stopped asking about my day. I'd mention a new client at work, something funny that happened on a call, or even just what I picked up from the store. Nothing. No response. Just scrolling. His phone might as well have been glued to his hand. Always angled away from me. Always on silent. I told myself it wasn't weird. People get busy. Phones are just part of life now. But something about the way he hovered over it, the way he'd turn it face down the second I walked into the room, that was new. Then came the gym. Out of nowhere, he became obsessed with fitness. Not in a healthy way, in a drastic, overnight kind of way. New membership at a boutique gym across town. Protein powders I'd never seen before stacked in the pantry. He started meal prepping for himself and himself only. Chicken, rice, broccoli, lined up in clear containers like a personal rebrand. He claimed it was stress relief. I asked once if he wanted me to go with him, and he said, "It's not really your thing." It stung more than I expected. He bought new clothes. Expensive ones. Minimalist, fitted, overpriced. I recognized the brands from a style blog I'd read once. He hated shopping. But suddenly, he had opinions about linen. He started wearing cologne again. Said it was part of presenting himself professionally. But even the way he said it, like I wouldn't understand, carried a tone I hadn't heard from him before. Smug. Detached. The skincare was when I started to feel truly stupid. One night, I walked into the bathroom and saw a lineup of products I'd never seen before: toners, serums, under-eye creams. I made a joke about him spending more on his face than I did, and he just stared at me in the mirror and said, "That's probably something you should reconsider." It wasn't what he said. It was how he said it. Like he was embarrassed of me. Like I was someone who'd stopped mattering a long time ago and hadn't noticed yet. I tried to talk to him. More than once. One night, I sat down next to him on the couch while he was half watching a YouTube video about crypto, scrolling on his phone at the same time. I asked gently if everything was okay. I said it felt like he was pulling away. That we hadn't connected in a while. That I missed him. He didn't even look up. "You're imagining things," he said, dismissively. "I'm just focused right now." I nodded like that made sense. Like I hadn't already seen his so-called focus flinch every time his phone lit up. At first, I blamed myself. I told myself I'd let things go. That maybe I had gotten too comfortable. That maybe if I joined the gym, cooked differently, wore nicer things around the apartment, things would shift. I started doing my makeup again even on days I worked from home. I tried new recipes, things he used to like, but he barely noticed. He was always full. Or heading out in a bit. He started taking more work trips. San Francisco. Miami. Once, Mexico City. All with little notice and no real explanation beyond vague mentions of meetings and high-value clients. He wouldn't share details. Confidential stuff, he'd say, brushing me off. No flight confirmation emails. No receipts. Just a suitcase packed too neatly, cologne spritzed too generously, and his laptop left behind, which was odd, considering how glued he used to be to it. One night before a trip, I asked if he needed help packing. He said no. Said I probably wouldn't know what he needed. That line sat in my chest like a weight. Then came the passwords. I'd never snooped. Not because I was above it, but because I never felt like I had to. But that started to change. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and realize I didn't even know the password to his work phone. He had a second phone now, something he told me was just for business. I'd asked to use it once to check directions, and he handed it over without unlocking it. "It's just easier if I do it," he said, punching in his code. I didn't say anything. But later that night, I wrote down the model number. The distance between us had become a canyon. Every time I tried to bridge it, he'd find a way to make me feel small for trying. I wasn't supportive. I was distracting. I wasn't giving space. I was insecure. And the worst part is I believed him. Because for years, I'd been the helper. The builder. The believer. If something wasn't working, my instinct was to work harder. Make myself more useful. More adaptable. I didn't see the shift for what it was, not right away. I just kept adjusting. He started keeping a second bank account. At first, it was under the guise of business expenses, but more and more money started moving into it. When I asked, he said he was separating income streams for tax purposes. I didn't press. But one night, I noticed a $3,200 withdrawal that didn't have any memo attached. When I asked, he said it was a contractor payment. That I wouldn't understand the structure of the project. It was always some version of that. You wouldn't understand. You're overthinking. You're imagining things. I started to go silent. It was easier. Less embarrassing than being brushed off again. When we did talk, it was mostly transactional. Bills. Groceries. Laundry. Once, I told him I was thinking of going back for my master's. He shrugged and said, "Do whatever you want." Not in a supportive way. In a way that made it clear he didn't care. I remember sitting on the edge of our bed one night while he packed for another trip, trying to figure out what was worse, the feeling that he was cheating or the realization that he just didn't see me anymore. It's a strange kind of grief, losing someone who's still in the room with you. Who still uses the same toothbrush and sleeps on the same pillow, but who stopped choosing you long before they left. And yet I stayed. Because when you've spent years building something, even if it's mostly in your head, the idea of tearing it down feels unbearable. So you hold your breath. And hope. But deep down, I think I knew. I just didn't know how bad it was going to get. It happened on a Thursday. I was walking into a client pitch downtown, the kind of meeting where you force a smile and keep your voice steady, even when your stomach is a knot. I'd barely slept the night before, Vincent had flown to Austin that morning, supposedly for a brand partnership thing that had never come up before. I hadn't asked questions. At that point, I'd stopped asking anything. As I reached into my bag for lip balm, my phone buzzed. A text from Vincent. At first, I thought maybe his flight got delayed. Maybe he forgot something and needed me to FedEx it. But when I opened the message, my hand went cold. I'm sorry. I've met someone. She's 21. I'm happy for once. I transferred what I needed from our joint account. Please don't make this ugly. I stared at the screen, rereading each line like I'd misunderstood. Like maybe he'd sent it to the wrong person. But no, my name was right there. And so was his. No warning. No conversation. Just a 5-sentence exit. Like a form letter for cowards. I barely remember walking out of that building. I know I turned around before making it to the receptionist. I know I made it to the elevator and that my hands were shaking. I know that when I got back to the parking lot, I sat in my car with the engine running and opened our banking app. There it was. Joint checking, $0. Joint savings, closed. I blinked hard, thinking maybe it was a glitch. I refreshed the app 3 times. Nothing changed. The entire balance, everything we'd built up for emergencies, future plans, rent next month, was gone. He'd drained it. There wasn't even a courtesy transfer left behind. Not $50. Not $5. Nothing. Just an empty account and a casual goodbye, like we'd been roommates splitting takeout, not partners who'd shared 6 years, a lease, and a life. He didn't call. He didn't even have the decency to hear my voice while detonating our relationship. He disappeared behind a text message and a 21-year-old I'd never heard of. I sat in that car for almost 2 hours. At some point, I turned the engine off. Then back on. Then off again. My phone buzzed a few more times, texts from coworkers, a Slack ping, a reminder about dinner with my sister, but nothing from Vincent. No clarification. No apology. No sign that he understood the gravity of what he'd done. Eventually, I drove home. The apartment was exactly as we'd left it that morning. A coffee mug in the sink. His towel still damp in the bathroom. His cologne lingering in the hallway. It felt like walking through the scene of a robbery where nothing had been broken, but everything was gone. I checked his office. His laptop was gone. So was the second phone. The backpack he always traveled with was missing. He'd left a half-empty water bottle on the desk and a stack of mail he'd never bothered to open. His closet looked untouched at first, but the drawers were lighter. A few key pieces missing. The things he actually wore. The things that mattered. He'd planned this. Maybe not down to the exact day, but enough to know what he was taking. And what he was leaving. Me. He left me. And not with a breakup. Not with a conversation. But with a text that read more like a customer service notification than the end of a relationship. I sat on the floor of our living room, staring at the TV that was still logged into his Netflix profile, and felt nothing. No tears. No screaming. Just a strange, suspended silence. Like I'd been dropped into someone else's life and didn't have the script. I don't know how long I stayed there. Eventually, I stood up and opened the fridge out of habit, like maybe normalcy was hidden behind the almond milk and week-old leftovers. That's when it hit me. It wasn't just the money. Or the cowardice. It was the sheer audacity of it. That he thought I wouldn't notice. That he thought I wouldn't do anything. He really believed he could erase me with a transfer and a shrug. There's a kind of betrayal that doesn't come with shouting or slammed doors. It comes quiet, efficient, dismissive. And somehow, that cuts deeper than rage ever could. Later that evening, my sister called. She wanted to know if we were still on for dinner. I didn't have the words. I told her no, that something had come up. She asked if I was okay. I said I'd call her tomorrow. I didn't. I didn't want pity. Or sympathy. Or the stunned silence people give you when your life blows up and they don't know what to say. What I wanted, what I needed, was clarity. So I opened my laptop. I pulled up the spreadsheet where I'd tracked our joint expenses. The logins. The patterns. The timeline. I started making notes. Because what Vincent didn't know, what he had completely underestimated, was that while he'd been off curating his new life with a 21-year-old who probably still called her mom when her car made a weird sound, I had been paying attention to everything. And I wasn't about to let him get away with it. Not because I wanted revenge, but because he took something from me that I couldn't replace. Not the money, the choice. He decided how it would end. Now it was my turn. I didn't cry when I first read the text, or when I saw the bank balance, or when I walked through our apartment and realized he'd taken everything he needed and left behind everything that would be a hassle to replace. I didn't cry when I sat on the floor of our kitchen and ate a sleeve of saltines for dinner because I was too nauseous to cook, too angry to sleep, and too numb to even feel hungry. That all came later at 2:07 a.m., to be exact, when I finally called my sister. She picked up immediately. No small talk. No, hey, what's up? Just tell me what happened. I told her everything. The text, the drained account, the 21-year-old, the lack of warning, the fact that my entire adult life had just been dismantled by a man who didn't even have the decency to face me. And that's when I finally broke. Not in some cinematic, weepy way. It was quieter than that. Just the slow, cracking sound in my chest, like a fault line that had finally split all the way through. I sat in the dark, clutching the phone with one hand and a throw pillow with the other, as years of exhaustion, compromise, and blind loyalty leaked out of me all at once. My sister didn't say much, just stayed on the line, breathing with me while I crumbled. "You're gonna be okay," she said eventually. "And when he realizes what he lost, it'll already be too late." I didn't believe her. Not then. But I remembered the words. The next morning, I woke up on the couch with my laptop still open beside me and my face stiff from dried tears. My head hurt. My body ached. I felt like I'd run a marathon in my sleep. But somewhere beneath the pain, under the humiliation and the fury, there was something else. Clarity. Not the empowering kind people post about online with affirmations and inspirational quotes. The cold, stripped-down kind. The kind that makes you see every decision, every compromise, every red flag for exactly what it was. I'd spent 6 years building someone else's dream. I'd co-signed, supported, sacrificed. I'd worked late hours to cover his expenses. I'd lent him my laptop when his crashed. I'd helped build the deck that landed his biggest client. I'd been his assistant, his therapist, his PR rep, his accountant, all unpaid, all unacknowledged. And the return on my investment? A text. No conversation. No explanation. Just a text, a zeroed-out bank account, and a disappearing act. But what he didn't know, what he never thought to ask, was that I'd seen this coming. Not exactly like this. Not the girl, or the money, or the cowardice. But I'd seen the shift. The withdrawal. The growing contempt. And I'd started preparing. Months ago, I'd begun pulling together paperwork. Not because I didn't trust him, at least, not then, but because I wanted to understand what I was part of. Where the money went. What the business actually looked like behind the scenes. I'd seen the expenses labeled marketing that didn't make sense. The dinners that weren't tax-deductible. The Venmo payments to names I didn't recognize. At first, I thought maybe I was overthinking it. That maybe I was turning into one of those people, paranoid, controlling. But I made a copy of the receipts anyway. I saved screenshots. Forwarded emails to a private address. Not because I planned to use them, but because something in me, some quiet, self-protective voice I hadn't listened to in years, told me I should. He had always assumed I was too loyal to walk away. Too invested. Too dependent. And maybe I had been. For a long time. But the woman he blindsided wasn't the same one who floated his credit card bill 5 years ago. She had learned. Slowly. Quietly. But she learned. So the morning after the betrayal, I pulled up the folders I'd created months ago. I opened the financial statements. The contract drafts. The emails between him and his designer where he accidentally attached a breakdown of revenue split that didn't match what he'd told me. I made a list. Of every bill still in both our names. Of every shared account. Of every password I'd created. Every subscription I'd maintained. Every tool he used that was technically tied to my email. And then I made another list. Of every lawyer I'd ever met through work. Every friend of a friend who worked in compliance, tax law, or forensic accounting. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was inventory. I called the bank first. Reported the unauthorized transfer. Froze the joint accounts. Flagged the activity as suspicious. Then I contacted the landlord. Told them Vincent had vacated without notice and that I'd be assuming the lease alone. They were sympathetic. Said I could update the paperwork online. I called his phone. Not the second one, that was never going to be answered, but the main one. It rang 3 times, then went to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I didn't need to. Instead, I sent a single text. Good luck. That was it. No punctuation. No follow-up. Just 2 words. I deleted his contact after that. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, document scans, and long silences in the apartment that used to feel like home. I called my credit card companies. Changed every password. Canceled every auto payment. Updated every login. I called my employer and asked for a few personal days. They didn't ask questions. Just told me to take the time I needed. I turned off notifications. I ignored social media. I didn't want to know where he was, what he was doing, or who he was with. I just wanted to reclaim my air. The first night I slept through without waking up in a panic. I woke up confused by the calm. Then I remembered. Not the betrayal. The power. The fact that I was still here. Still standing. And he had no idea what was coming. Vincent always underestimated me. He assumed because I didn't raise my voice, because I didn't fight when things got uneven, because I kept the house running and our bills paid without asking for applause, that I was passive. That I wouldn't act. That if he pulled the rug out from under me, I'd just land quietly and find a way to keep going. What he forgot, or maybe never knew, was that I was the one who set up his entire backend. His domains. His QuickBooks account. His Stripe and PayPal integrations. His tax IDs. His cloud storage and business email. I had legal access to everything. And he had never once thought to change the passwords. So while he was off with someone whose biggest worry was probably whether her phone charger worked in hotel outlets, I was sitting at my kitchen table with a legal pad, printing off every transaction, every invoice, every client email I could get my hands on. The next morning, I called my lawyer. Her name is Nadine, and we'd met years ago when she helped my friend with a small business contract. I remembered she was sharp, discreet, and didn't waste time. I told her what had happened, what I had access to, and what I intended to do. She didn't flinch. Instead, she said, "First, we're filing for divorce." Immediately. Irreconcilable differences. We'll serve him as soon as we can confirm his location. Second, I want you to send me everything. Every document, every login. We'll go through it line by line. I spent the next 6 hours compiling files. Receipts for personal purchases labeled as client entertainment. Payments to freelance contractors who didn't exist. Transfers from the business account to a crypto wallet that wasn't registered to any official business name. And the best part? The email chain between him and a web designer who he'd overpaid, someone he was clearly trying to impress. Buried in the thread was an accidental reply all where he made a joke about writing off hotels as market research. The IRS doesn't like jokes. By the time Nadine got back to me that evening, she had already connected with a forensic accountant she trusted. I gave them full access. They flagged at least 17 violations in under 48 hours. A few were minor, but some were serious: misreporting income, masking personal travel as company retreats, failing to report taxable gifts. And all of it was documented. Sloppy. Traceable. Easily linked. I knew reporting him would burn the bridge completely. But he'd already set fire to the house. I was just walking away with the matches he forgot I held. 3 days later, the letter went out to the IRS. Not anonymous. Not speculative. Full documentation. Timelines. Attachments. Supporting evidence. At the same time, Nadine filed the divorce petition. We sent it to every email and mailing address we had on record. We CC'd the lawyer listed on his original LLC filing, who, incidentally, was still his former college friend and clearly had no idea what Vincent had been doing with the company since. I didn't hear from Vincent until 5 days later. He called first. I didn't answer. Then came the emails. The first was casual. Hey, I know things got messy. Let's try to keep it civil. No need to involve lawyers. We can work something out. I ignored it. Then came the second. This is ridiculous. You had no right to freeze the accounts. That was my money. We need to talk. I let Nadine handle that one. Then came the texts. What did you do? I'm getting calls from clients. You went too far. And then, finally, please. Just call me. I read that one twice. The shift from arrogance to panic was fast. Predictable. Almost boring. But I didn't reply. Not directly. I sent him one message. Just 2 words. Good luck. And then I blocked him. He tried reaching out through mutual contacts. One of his friends, the kind who liked to think of himself as neutral, called and said, "Look, I don't want to get in the middle, but Vincent's in bad shape. Maybe just let it go. Let it go." I almost laughed. Because what they didn't understand, what none of them understood, was that this wasn't about revenge. Not really. It wasn't even about the money. It was about the years I'd spent holding him up while he planned his escape. The years I'd pushed my own goals to the side to help build his version of success. The years I kept believing that one day I'd be seen, considered, included. He made sure that never happened. So now I was just making sure there were consequences. Not manufactured ones. Not dramatic. Just real. Meanwhile, Nadine filed for a temporary court order to protect any remaining joint assets, including intellectual property. Since I was technically the one who filed the original paperwork for Quirkly, and the domain name was still registered under my name, we had leverage. Not enough to shut it down yet, but enough to freeze things while we investigated further. Word spread. 2 of his clients reached out to me directly. Said they hadn't heard from him. That invoices were unpaid. That they were considering legal action. I didn't say much, just referred them to Nadine and wished them well. But I could feel the shift happening. Vincent had built a business on charm, on fast talk, on relationships he didn't nurture and responsibilities he didn't respect. Without me behind the curtain, holding the strings, the whole thing was falling apart. And I didn't need to lift a finger. Just remove mine. He finally sent one last email. Long, dramatic. Full of half-hearted apologies and passive-aggressive guilt trips. He said I'd ruined him. That I made this uglier than it had to be. That he never expected me to be so vindictive. I forwarded it to Nadine. She wrote back, "Men like this think consequences are cruelty. Let's keep going." So we did. It was quiet, methodical work. Filing. Documenting. Protecting what was mine. Reclaiming what had been taken. No shouting. No drama. Just clear lines and firm decisions. I ordered new locks. Closed shared accounts. Got a new number. I updated my resume. Scheduled interviews. Called in every favor I'd earned and never asked to cash. Within 2 weeks, I had a new job. Better pay. Better title. No trace of Vincent's shadow in the background. And for the first time in years, my decisions were mine alone. He thought leaving me would leave me powerless. He was wrong. He thought he'd taken everything. But he forgot who helped him build it in the first place. And now he was the one left starting from zero. By the time summer rolled in, everything had changed. Vincent's business, the one he built on buzzwords, shortcuts, and my invisible labor, was crumbling in slow motion. It started with the smaller cracks. A former client left a not-so-subtle review on his site, questioning billing transparency. Then a freelancer he'd hired posted screenshots of overdue invoices, tagging his company account. At first, he tried to do what he always did, talk his way out of it. Smooth over the mess. Say it was a misunderstanding or a technical issue. But when people started comparing notes, the story stopped adding up. Within 3 months of me filing the audit, the IRS launched an official inquiry. Apparently, someone flagged his quarterly filings as inconsistent with reported earnings. The real surprise was how little time it took them to act once they had all the documentation. And he had no clue I'd been the one to give it to them. I never made a scene. Never posted anything. Never told anyone who didn't need to know. This wasn't about humiliation. This was about clarity. Accountability. It wasn't long before the new girlfriend, the 21-year-old, disappeared from his social media. One day, she was posing poolside in a startup girlfriend hoodie he had probably made her wear. A week later, her account went private, and someone tagged her in a story at a club with a different guy. No mention of Vincent. No photos. No trace. I didn't feel smug. I felt nothing. He'd replaced me so quickly, or thought he had. But what he didn't understand was that what I gave him couldn't be replicated with youth or flattery. He wasn't just looking for affection. He was looking for scaffolding. And when he couldn't find another woman willing to bankroll his delusions or clean up his mistakes, everything started to collapse. Friends he used to brag to started distancing themselves. The men who once called him a hustler and reposted his wins went quiet. A few unfollowed him. The only people who stuck around were the ones who were too far removed to know the full story. I moved out of our condo at the end of June. I packed my things in silence, room by room, and left behind anything that reminded me of a version of myself I no longer wanted to be. The new place wasn't glamorous. A one-bedroom walk-up with drafty windows and mismatched tile in the kitchen. But it was mine. My name on the lease. My rules. My furniture. I picked every dish, every rug, every towel. Nothing came with old memories attached. And for the first time in years, I started sleeping through the night. My new job started quietly, a marketing role at a clean tech company that actually cared about its mission. I wasn't anyone's assistant, shadow, or silent fixer. I was hired for my brain, not my proximity to someone else's ambition. My boss didn't expect me to smile through chaos or pick up the emotional slack. She just wanted me to deliver. So I did. Within weeks, I was in charge of my own campaigns. Trusted with strategy. Asked for input. Paid on time. The shift was disorienting. I didn't realize how much I'd lowered my standards until I finally felt what it was like to be valued. Outside of work, I kept to myself. I wasn't ready to get back out there, as well-meaning people liked to suggest. I needed time. To recalibrate. To trust my own instincts again. Instead, I built routines. I took early morning walks. Cooked meals that didn't revolve around someone else's preferences. Reconnected with people I'd quietly drifted from during the years I'd been orbiting Vincent's needs. It was slow, steady work. Quietly reclaiming pieces of myself. One afternoon, about 2 months after I moved, I ran into one of Vincent's former colleagues at a networking event. She recognized me instantly. We weren't close, but she'd always been polite. After a bit of small talk, she leaned in and said, "I don't know what happened, but he's kind of a mess now." I raised an eyebrow. She continued. "Half the team quit. 2 clients pulled out. There's rumors about tax stuff, and honestly, he's not handling it well. It's like he's unraveling." I nodded. Said nothing. She paused, then added, "Just between us, I always wondered how he kept it all together. Now I think, maybe it wasn't him doing the holding." I smiled politely and excused myself. Later that night, I thought about what she said. Maybe it wasn't him doing the holding. It wasn't meant to be profound. But it landed hard. Because the truth was, I had held so much. Quietly. Without thanks. Without acknowledgement. And he never noticed. Never thought to ask what happened to the foundation after he built his ego on top of it. Watching from a distance, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to fully admit until then. Vincent wasn't evil. He was entitled. Entitled to support he didn't earn. Entitled to affection he didn't reciprocate. Entitled to success that was built on someone else's labor. And more than anything, he was unprepared. Unprepared to live without a safety net. Unprepared to face consequences. Unprepared to manage what he'd taken for granted. He hadn't just left me. He had freed me and doomed himself in the process. And while he scrambled, trying to fix a sinking ship with duct tape and charm, I just kept moving forward. Every day that I didn't look over my shoulder was a kind of victory. Every small decision, choosing a new rug, unsubscribing from his old client mailing lists, deleting our old joint Spotify, was its own quiet form of power. And I began to understand something I never had when I was with him. That starting over isn't the same as losing. Sometimes, it's the only real win. Almost exactly 1 year after he left, Vincent reached out. It was a random Tuesday. No holidays. No anniversaries. Just an ordinary afternoon when my phone buzzed with a name I hadn't seen in months. I was in the middle of editing a proposal for a new sustainability client when the message came through. Can we talk? No context. No subject line. Just those 4 words, like we'd parted on neutral terms. Like he'd just forgotten to return a jacket or wanted to catch up over coffee. I didn't answer right away. I put my phone down, finished my edits, closed my laptop. I took a walk to the coffee shop around the corner and sat with a tea I didn't really want, just letting the message sit in my pocket like a small, buzzing reminder of a door I had already closed. Locked. Walked away from. That night, I told Nadine. I don't want to go backwards, I said. But I also don't want to pretend this didn't happen. She didn't push. If you do meet, she said, meet on your terms. No ambiguity. No manipulation. You've earned the right to choose how this ends. So I replied. We can talk. My attorney will join us. Let me know when you're available. He didn't respond for 2 days. When he did, he said, is that really necessary? I didn't answer that one. But a week later, we met. In a neutral office space Nadine arranged. White walls, glass door, conference table. Clinical, cold, safe. He looked smaller. Not physically, he was still tall, still put together in that way men can be when they think a button-down erases accountability, but faded. Like someone who had been living in the past year without structure. Without scaffolding. I was early. He was late. Typical. When he walked in, he nodded at Nadine, then looked at me. Not quite eye contact. Just somewhere in the range of polite. I appreciate you meeting me, he said, sitting down. I just wanted to say some things. Things I should have said a long time ago. I waited. I know I handled everything badly, he started. I was in a weird place. I didn't know how to fix things between us, and I panicked. The girl, that whole situation, it wasn't real. I think I was just trying to feel something different. Something easier. I didn't flinch. He kept going. I didn't mean to hurt you. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of how predictable it was. He'd spent a year watching his business fall apart. Watching his reputation fade. Watching the consequences of his actions finally show up to collect. And now that the damage was undeniable, he wanted a clean line back to the person he'd once called his foundation. He called it an apology. I called it a salvage attempt. Nadine stayed silent beside me, just observing. I was glad she was there. Her presence alone reminded me not to soften. Vincent looked at me like he was expecting something. Maybe a nod. A tear. Some indication that he was reaching me. Instead, I said, I don't need this. His brow furrowed. What do you mean? I don't need closure, I said calmly. I don't need your apology. I have peace. He looked stunned. Not offended. Just genuinely confused. I thought you'd want to hear why. Because you finally feel guilty. He blinked. I'm not angry anymore, Vincent. But I'm not interested in rewriting what happened. You didn't just end a relationship. You walked away from everything we built and treated me like a disposable part of your career. And now that it didn't work out the way you thought it would, you want to patch it with a conversation. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I leaned back in the chair. Peace doesn't require permission. And it definitely doesn't negotiate with people who treated you like a backup plan. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I don't expect us to go back. I wanted to take responsibility. I wanted to be honest. That would have been useful a year ago. He nodded. It was the first thing he did that felt genuine. I was wrong, he said. About you. About everything. It wasn't enough. But I didn't need it to be. When we left the meeting, he tried to linger. Asked if we could talk again sometime. I said I'd think about it. I wouldn't. But I didn't owe him the finality. Outside, Nadine smiled slightly. You didn't even need me in there, she said. I did, I replied. Not for legal reasons. just to remind myself who I am now. And who I was now didn't second-guess her own boundaries. Rebuilding trust wasn't just about whether he could earn it, it was about whether I even wanted to offer the opportunity. I didn't. Forgiveness and reconciliation aren't the same thing. I can forgive what he did without inviting him back into my life. I can understand how broken he must have been to leave the way he did, and still want nothing to do with who he is now. There was a time when I would have clung to that meeting, replayed his words, looked for sincerity, wondered if he meant it. But that part of me was gone. Not hardened, just clear. I wasn't looking for apologies. I wasn't searching for closure. I'd created my own. And the trust one rebuilt? It wasn't for him. It was for me. Trust in my ability to start over. Trust that silence is a complete answer. Trust that survival isn't about never breaking, it's about what you do once you've rebuilt. And I rebuilt beautifully. Without him. It's been 3 years. Not a long time in the grand scheme of things. But long enough to unlearn the habits of self-abandonment. Long enough to forget his voice. Long enough to rebuild something better, quietly, deliberately, and entirely on my own terms. I live in a small condo now. Just me, a dog I adopted last fall, and a view that catches the sun in the mornings and the city lights at night. It's not flashy. No one would mistake it for luxury. But it's mine. Paid for, protected, and peaceful. There are no shared accounts. No automatic transfers. No secret passwords I don't know. I know where every dollar goes, every account stands, and every boundary begins. I sleep well. I wake up without that weight in my chest, the one that used to press down on me during the last years with Vincent, even when nothing seemed wrong on the surface. Back then, I chalked it up to stress. Burnout. Life. Now I know it was imbalance. The slow rot of a life that demanded too much and gave too little in return. I laugh more now. Louder, too. I say no without guilt. I don't explain myself to people who don't earn that kind of access. And when I make decisions, big or small, I do it without the invisible whisper of someone else's preferences steering the wheel. That's the part no one talks about when they say things like, "You'll come out stronger." They mean well. But what they don't say is that strength isn't loud. It's not about revenge or showing off or proving someone wrong. It's about living better. Quietly. Sustainably. Without apology. Sometimes women reach out. A friend of a friend. A colleague. Someone who's not sure if they're imagining things, if their relationship is just in a rough patch, or if maybe, like me, they've been slowly disappearing inside it. I never tell them what to do. I just tell them what I wish someone had told me. That the hardest part isn't walking away. It's realizing how long you stayed waiting for something that was never coming. The real grief is in the time you lost. The versions of yourself you buried to keep the peace. The dreams you quietly shelved until things settled down. And once you see it, really see it, you can't unsee it. That was the moment things changed for me. Not when Vincent sent the text. Not even when I found the bank account empty. But when I realized I had trained myself to tolerate it. To justify it. To keep smoothing the edges of his behavior so it wouldn't cut too deep. That part broke me more than the betrayal. But it also built the version of me I am now. The version that doesn't flinch when people leave. The version that doesn't panic when a door closes. The version that doesn't mistake chaos for passion or silence for stability. As for Vincent, last I heard, through a friend of a former client, he was starting over. Again. Some vague startup idea that hadn't found footing. A few consulting gigs that hadn't lasted. A stint back in his hometown that no one was really talking about. He's not doing terribly, from what I can gather. But he's not thriving either. Just floating. Still charming. Still looking for the next shortcut. Still chasing something that looks like success, but never seems to stick. That used to make me angry. The idea that he could walk away from so much wreckage and still land on his feet. But now, I see it differently. Because landing on your feet doesn't mean much if you never learn to stand still. Vincent's always been running. From accountability. From intimacy. From the quiet work of building something real. Me? I stopped running. I did the work. I sat in the silence. I looked at the parts of myself I didn't like, the parts that stayed too long, gave too much, trusted too easily, and I chose to change them. Not out of spite. Not to prove anything. Just to be better. Better to myself. I kept some things from that chapter, though. Not out of nostalgia, but as reminders. There's a spreadsheet on my computer, the one I built in the weeks after he left. It's archived now, tucked away in a folder I don't open. I don't need to, but I haven't deleted it either, because it's not just a record of what happened. It's proof of what I survived. There's also a single photo of us, buried in a box in the back of my closet. I didn't burn it or rip it up. I don't look at it, but I kept it. Not because I miss him, but because I never want to forget the version of me that once believed someone like him was a safe place to land. She wasn't weak. She was hopeful. And hope is not a flaw. It's just something that needs to be directed toward the right people. These days, I direct it inward. Toward the life I'm building. The people who show up. The peace I've protected. And when I think about legacy, not the kind you leave behind for the world, but the kind you leave behind for yourself, I think about that moment in the car. When I read that text. When I opened the banking app. When I stared at the screen and realized I had a choice. To fall apart. Or to start again. I chose to start again. And in doing so, I ended something that had already been dying in silence for years. Some lessons come slow. Mine came fast. The moment he hit send. If you've ever had to rebuild after someone tried to break you, what did that look like for you? Did you get closure? Or did you have to create your own? Let me know in the comments. And if this story hit home, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real stories about reclaiming your worth, setting boundaries, and starting over on your own terms. Thanks for watching. You're stronger than you think.